All right, let's get underway. So, topography refers to the mapping of a terrain's surface features, its elevations and depressions, its ridges and valleys, its hidden depths. So in the context of what we're going to be looking at today, the terrain we will be going into is the inner life of the human mind. So in the previous presentation, we looked at phase 1, the state of exteriors, and we mapped the outer surface of that terrain. And that involved having a look at the exterior self-image and in particular the moral and civil facade. So phase 2, the state of interiors, allows for the penetration of the light of the word to illuminate the inner topography. And so the second state of awakening, which is what we're drawing from today, can be found in Heaven and Hell 499 to 511. And the second state builds on the first. So the state of exteriors is introductory. It provides a framework for thinking about the spiritual life as it unfolds within the human mind. And it moves through a process of stripping away exterior aspects of the self that do not correspond to what is interior. And the purpose for this is so that a way is opened for the interior aspects to be brought into conscious awareness so that their quality can be examined in the light of truths from the Word. So it's important to note that we are reading these states not as a literal description of the afterlife, but as a map of the interior life of the mind. So the very states we encounter in our own practice. So what Heaven and Hell describes of spirits in the world of spirits, Logopraxis reads as states of the awakening mind. So if we are to become conscious of our own awakening process, then the ability to discern the interior quality of a state is essential, because it is this discernment that allows evils to be acknowledged and shunned, and heavenly loves to be affirmed as the basis for one's life. Now, the second state of awakening coincides with the growing conviction that the word must be engaged with to access these more interior states of mind. As this engagement deepens through our own praxis, and as we bear witness to the word working in the lives of others in our Logopraxis life groups, trust that the word can carry us through the process that it initiates grows. And the state of interiors is it is actually the most demanding phase of the awakening process. It is where the deep attachments of what we take to be ourself are confronted, where the hellish proprium is encountered without its customary disguise, and where genuine temptation, that is the spiritual struggle to have our sense of self extracted from hellish influences, becomes unavoidable. So in that sense, it's not pleasant territory to engage, but without engagement, the necessary change that sees the transfer of our sense of self from its identification with hellish loves to heavenly loves just isn't possible. So the context for this session is what follows on once mental states have been processed through to the completion of the first phase of awakening. The work of stripping the exterior, recognizing the law of congruence, and making the inward pivot. Now the exterior mind is effectively laid to sleep and the interior begins to be opened. So the question now is, what will we find? Well, I guess the honest answer is that we will find things we were not expecting, things that contradict our self-image, things that reveal the depth of the hellish proprium's hold on our sense of self. And ultimately, we will find the beginning of something genuinely new, the heavenly proprium emerging from the deeper held aspects of the Lord's life within. So let's begin by understanding precisely what the shift into phase 2 involves. So Heaven and Hell 499 speaks of that in the second state, the state of interiors, the spirit is led or let into the interiors of the mind to experience the blunt force of the proprial will and thoughts, while exteriors are laid asleep. So two things happen simultaneously. The interior opens and the exterior closes. The social self, the persona, the consciously maintained moral face, all of this becomes quiet, and what remains is the unfettered inner world. So this is a significant shift, and it can feel disorientating. In phase 1, the exterior was still active. We were still managing how we appeared to ourselves and to others, still operating within the illusion that so long as I live an outwardly ordered moral and civil life, everything is fine. In phase 2, that outer structure having been removed brings us face to face with what it had been concealing. So logopraxis, or the practice of the word, opens us up to this very experience. There are moments in genuine practice, usually when we are alone or when a truth from the word strikes particularly deeply, when we suddenly have access to our actual interior state without the usual filtering. We see a thought we would never express. We recognize an affection we would be ashamed to acknowledge. We catch a current of feeling that runs directly contrary to what we hold the life of heaven to be. So the important thing about this is that these moments are not failures. They are the state of interiors beginning to open. The beam of light has penetrated the surface layer and illuminated something below. So this diagram's two layers tell the whole story. The pale, structured, ordered surface, the moral and civil exterior, and the dark, layered, organic depth, the will and thought in their raw state. Both are taken to be us. Phase 2 is the process of coming to accept that what the word declares this layer to be is actually true. This opening of the interior does not happen by chance or by introspection alone. It is the word, engaged with as a living practice, that initiates and sustains the descent, illuminating what would otherwise remain permanently below the threshold of our awareness. So before we can work effectively in phase 2, we need to understand the architecture of mental activity itself. So Heaven and Hell 499 establishes a foundational principle. We have two levels of thinking. This is not a novel spiritual claim. Anyone who has ever sat quietly with their own thoughts knows it. What the text does is identify precisely what each level is and how they relate. So just reading the quote from Heaven and Hell 499, subsection 2. There are two kinds of thought, one exterior and the other interior, and that there are those who speak from exterior thought, while from their interior thought they have other sentiments, and that these two kinds of thought are kept separate, since the interior is carefully prevented from flowing into the exterior and becoming manifest in any way. The exterior thought, on the left on the diagram, is what we might call the monitored mind. It is the stream of consciousness we allow to surface in social situations, measured, polite, socially calibrated. It is driven by the desire for favour, for reputation, for social position, and personal gain. It keeps the interior thought from transgressing the limits of decorum and good manners. The interior thought, on the right, is the unmonitored stream. When we are alone, when no social performance is required, this stream runs freely. It is bound not by social convention, but by our own actual ruling loves. The affections that underpin and holds what we take for our sense of self in place. And as Heaven and Hell 502 notes, in this state the spirit thinks from his very will, from his very affection, and thought and will make one. So most people go through their entire lives without registering the contradictions that exist between these two levels of mind. The exterior thought governs what is expressed. The interior thought operates in the background, mostly unexamined. The aim of phase 2 is to bring the interior thought into conscious awareness, not to suppress it, but to see it clearly, and then to bring the word to bear on what is seen. The exposure of the interior thought reveals a challenging spiritual law about quality. So this slide delivers what may be the hardest truth in phase 2. The same outward act can be either hellish or heavenly, entirely depending on the interior love that drives it. This is illustrated in these two spheres being identical on the surface, but entirely different within. Heaven and Hell 484 states this clearly. It says this: works and deeds of a moral and civil life, when they are done from heavenly love, are heavenly. For what is done from heavenly love is done from the Lord, and everything done from the Lord is good. But the deeds and works of moral and civil life, when done from infernal love, are infernal. For the things that are done from this love, which is the love of self and the love of the world, are done from man himself, and everything that is done from man himself is, in itself, evil. A self-image that appeals to moral and civil conduct as a measure of its own goodness is one of the most difficult obstacles to genuine spiritual life. An exteriorly ordered moral and civil life can be the ground from which one begins to become spiritual, but it can equally serve to conceal from others and from ourselves the darker aspects of the hellish proprium tied to the loves of self and the world. Awakening to spiritual life involves seeing that the quality of exteriors is determined by the quality of interiors. And this has a deeply confronting implication for the self-image that is grounded in good behavior as an indicator of spiritual health. We have been good people. We have done good things. We have helped others, been kind, been responsible, attended worship. And all of that is true. But phase 2 asks the question we have been avoiding. From what love have these things been done? From a genuine love of the Lord and the neighbour? Or from a love of approval, the sense of merit, the self-image of being a good person? So the honest answer for those who engage in an interior praxis is probably both. And the work of phase 2 is to distinguish between them, to develop the interior discernment that can identify in the moment which love is actually driving any given particular act, this particular response, or this particular choice. Without the Word forming the basis for our spiritual life, this kind of discernment is just not possible. This is not self-condemnation, it is self-knowledge, and it is the only foundation on which genuine charity can be built. So to facilitate this discernment, the doctrines distinguish two classes of interior life. So this matrix gives us a clear description of the states that make up two classes of interior life that Phase 2 reveals. By giving attention to this, we have a framework that can help us to see and respond to what's active within ourselves. Removing the literal meaning, which puts the focus on good and evil persons, and reading from the idea of states of mind, we can see that this describes not two different kinds of people, but two different kinds of interior state, both of which can be active in anyone engaged in a genuine spiritual practice. So let's just move through each of these rows. The top row there we have the ruling love, and Class 1 interiors are ruled by the love of self and the love of the world. The love of self, the desire for power, honor, gain, dominion, recognition, and the love of the world, a desire for wealth, material security, sensory pleasure, and possessing of all things. These pernicious loves operate covertly for the most part, concealed behind the moral, civil exterior. Class 2 interiors are ruled by spiritual and heavenly loves, the love of the Lord and love towards the neighbour. And these loves are often quiet and undemonstrative, but they work tirelessly, organising everything from the centre into a form receptive of higher heavenly influences. Let me come to the next row, the exterior state. So Class 1 uses the exterior as camouflage. It is specifically designed to conceal the self-interest within, whereas Class 2 has an exterior that authentically reveals the interior, not because it is trying to, but because the interior is genuinely good and the exterior naturally corresponds. So we have a Logopraxis aphorism that speaks to this. A natural mode of thinking conceals. A spiritual mode of thinking reveals. So the third and final row here is the relationship to the divine. So Class 1 covertly denies the Lord even while professing faith, even while performing religious acts. The fundamental orientation is denial, because to acknowledge the Lord by definition means to give up the belief in oneself as an independent, autonomous agent. Class 2 has a deep affection for divine truths, not as interesting information, but as the basis for living a genuinely spiritual life. The crucial practical question: which class is active right now, in this moment, in me? And this is not a question with a single permanent answer. It is a question that must be asked freshly in each state, each situation, each encounter. The capacity to ask it and to sit honestly with the answer is a core spiritual literacy skill in Phase 2. So the primary instrument for this discernment is the Word itself, functioning as an agent of illumination. The metaphor of the Word as light falling on darkness is central to Phase 2. In Phase 1, the light revealed surface-level discrepancies between exterior and interior. In Phase 2, the light goes deeper, into the submerged mass of unexamined lusts, unacknowledged anger, unrecognized contempt that have been operating beneath our default level of awareness. The Word is not background reading for the spiritual life. It is the active agent of the awakening process. Without it, the interiors remain closed. The hellish proprium continues to operate beneath the threshold of awareness, unexamined and unchallenged. Engagement with the Word as a practice is what opens the interior and makes the illumination possible. Divine Providence number 117 offers a striking image. Unexamined lusts remain like polluted waters, stopped up or stagnant. Waters that are stopped up don't disappear, they fester. The energies of the hellish proprium, if not brought to light, don't simply go away. They accumulate, becoming more concentrated, and eventually find expression in ways that surprise and perhaps shame us. The Word's light doesn't create these negative states. It reveals what was already there. This is the crucial point that we need to be constantly reminded of in the midst of temptations. This key idea is captured in the caution banner at the bottom of the slide. The sudden intensification of negative states is not a regression. It is the necessary mechanical disruption of bringing the unconscious into the light of consciousness. When practitioners enter genuine inner work and find that their anger, their contempt, their resentment seem to increase, when they discover depths of jealousy or self-pity they didn't know they had, this is certainly disorientating. It feels like going backwards. We have thoughts like, I was better before I started this practice. But this is not regression. It is the stopping up of the waters being released. The light is making visible what was already there. The appropriate response is not horror and self-condemnation. It is curiosity and acknowledgement. Look at that. This is what has been operating beneath the surface. I can see it now. That is the first step towards working with it. As the light penetrates deeper, the practitioner encounters something that feels very much like nakedness. Let it be understood that man is wholly such as his interiors are, and not such as his exteriors are separate from his interiors. Because of this, such as a man's interiors are, such he continues to be to eternity. This makes evident what is man's own and what is not his own. It's Heaven and Hell 501. Heaven and Hell 503 describes the characteristic experience of Phase 2 with remarkable psychological precision. A spirit in this state thinks from his very will, from his very affection, from his very love, and thought and will then make one. And he speaks with a kind of fear that the thoughts of the will may go forth naked. The fear of psychological nakedness is real and profound. We have spent our entire lives ensuring that the thoughts of the will do not go forth naked, that they are always clothed in the appropriate social dress of polite discourse and moral convention. Phase 2 is the experience of that clothing being stripped away. This fear of exposure takes its own form in the Logopraxis life group setting, where we are called upon to share our experience of the Word working in our lives. Yet it is able to be offset as the methodology of the praxis reframes these experiences so that they are transformed into valuable insights that support the regenerative process in all the members of the group. Where the word leads, guides, and directs, we discover our fears in this regard are misplaced. So I'll just bring your attention to the three-panelled image on the diagram here. The smooth silver circle, the persona polished and complete, the fragmenting circle, the mask beginning to break under the pressure of interior truth, and the raw dark stone that is exposed, the hellish proprium without its disguise. No longer concealed, we are confronted with the reality of the interiors, and coming to terms with the reality of this situation is what Phase 2 requires. Heaven and Hell 503 is explicit. When confronted with this interior state, the spirit seems to himself scarcely to think, but only to will. The intellectual overlay, the rationalization, the self-justifying narrative, all of this recedes, and what remains is raw will and raw affection. And this is frightening because the raw will is, at this stage, largely a hellish proprium driven by the loves of self and the world. If this process of exposure does not occur, the life of the mind remains under the relatively unconscious influence of the hellish proprium. A greater or lesser degree of denial of the Lord as the Word. To acknowledge the Lord is to live from the truths that we are able to draw from the Word. That is the basis for receiving a new heavenly proprium. But we need to understand that what presents as our will is only ours to the degree that we accept it as such. The hellish proprium encountered in this process is not us, despite how it feels. It is what has been lodged in us from the hells. This is a distinction that the merit-guilt cycle makes impossible to see, but that disidentification does make possible. The very fact that you can observe it, that you can name it, that you can sit with it, without entirely identifying with it, that's the reality. That observational capacity is of the Word or the Lord. It is the Word providing truths as a lens to observe what is arising. Without seeing the true quality of the hellish proprium in the light of what truths teach, there is no incentive to practice charity. And charity in logopraxis means shunning evils as sins against the Lord. If evils are not acknowledged, no change is possible. The need for it is simply not seen. This phase of the awakening process illuminates interiors so that any self-deception arising from belief in our own inherent goodness can be acknowledged as false, and all good returned to the Lord. The experience of Phase 2 is not one of continuous descent. It involves a rhythmic alternation. A crucible is a vessel in which metals are refined under extreme heat. The alternation of states in Phase 2 is the heat of the crucible. It is not comfortable, but it is what refines. Heaven and Hell 506, subsection 3, describes the mechanism. Spirits in this state are let down by short intervals into the state of their exteriors and into a recollection of their actions when they were in the state of their interiors. As we practice self-examination by the light of truths from the Word, we encounter similar experiences to those described here. They are given briefly the contrast of the exterior, the relative calm and order of the moral persona, against the chaos they just experienced in the interior. Then they are let back into the interior. So this is a common experience in logopraxis work. There are times of respite and times of chaos. But the word holds us between those states. This alternation serves three purposes, as the slide shows. The ability to bring contrast. The back and forth movement between exterior and interior provides the contrast needed to acknowledge the quality of the interior. Without the comparison, without knowing what the ordered exterior feels like alongside the disordered interior, it is difficult to see clearly that something is wrong. The contrast creates the capacity for discernment. Then we have the reaction. The text outlines a range of responses that can occur. Deep shame and confession. I have been insane. Belligerent refusal to acknowledge. I feel no shame. And angry resistance to the process. Why am I not permitted to remain in my exteriors where it's peaceful? Whenever we engage with the text over a praxis cycle, these kinds of responses are likely because these point to precisely what the word is working to free us from. Acknowledging our investment in what is opposed to the Lord is difficult, but acknowledge it we must, if we are to come to see that these things are not us. They belong to the hells, to the hellish proprium. Then the third point is the purpose. Temptation, the experience of spiritual struggle that comes with alternating states, is not an accident or a punishment. Heaven and Hell 508 is explicit that without temptation, no heavenly proprium can emerge. The struggle between the hellish and heavenly states is what builds the spiritual muscle, the interior strength that sustains the heavenly life. It also maintains rational freedom, the capacity to choose from a genuinely free will rather than being driven automatically by whatever affection or thought arises in our own inner landscape. So despite how things appear, this alternation of states is not a true mixture. No one is permitted to be in heaven and hell at the same time. These alternations are the process by which the sense of self is removed from attachment to what opposes the Lord and then be grafted into the goods and truths that constitutes the life of heaven. When we fall into identifying with these evils as arising from us, we can experience states of desolation, self-pity, guilt, depression, anxiety, and all this is accompanied with plenty of negative self-talk. All this feeds one of the most destructive patterns that emerges in phase 2, the merit-guilt cycle. The merit-guilt cycle is the default experience for most people living a historical form of faith. The focus of religion on this level is not on the mental life, but is chiefly concerned with external performance or moral and civil conduct. In this mode of life, exteriors are the primary focus in religion. We have a natural faith that has yet to become a saving or genuine spiritual faith. So this cycle represents a deeply set pattern of behavior that persists long after the awakening process has begun. Again, anyone who is engaged in inner work will be able to recognize this dynamic at work within them. If we can see its operation in our own experience, we will have a powerful tool for identifying this state when it is active. So let's map it out a bit. In doing so, we can distinguish it from the genuine path of repentance. So walking through this cycle, if we begin at the top circle of the diagram, what we see there is an effort to be or a sincere desire to be a good person. And this is where phase 2 starts for most. We engage with our practice. We try to live well. We apply truths. Then something happens. The hellish proprium erupts. Something we thought we had moved past, a pattern we thought we had resolved, an anger or contempt we didn't know we carried, it acts out. Unexpectedly, in a moment we weren't guarding, the interior state reveals itself and we recognize it's something hellish, or at least it's definitely not something we would say was heavenly. And then what follows is desolation or a sense of guilt. Negative self-talk. I am terrible. I have failed. What's wrong with me? After all this work, I am still this. Low self-worth and self-condemnation follow. These states are painful and they carry a profound sense of hopelessness. And then there is the resolution. I will be better. I will try harder. I will not let this happen again. And we return to the effort to be good, and the cycle begins again. The fundamental error is identified on the slide. We mistakenly believe these evils are sourced in our core self. If I believe the hellish proprium and what arises from it is essentially me, the real me beneath the spiritual pretensions, then the logical response is guilt and shame. I am fundamentally evil. The cycle is trying to deny or overcome that fundamental badness. But if I understand that the hellish proprium is not me, that it is hellish influx arising from the hells, not from the core of my spiritual self, then the response to encountering it is entirely different. The encounter is then based on the recognition and acceptance that what the word says of the hellish proprium is actually true, rather than it being an identification with a defective me that I have to fix if I want to get to heaven. It is our identification with the proprium as ourself that holds us in a state of wanting to improve it, despite the word's declaration that it is nothing but evil and falsity, or hell itself. To be freed from it, we have to come to see this, and the only way to seeing it is to pass through the second state of awakening. When we see the hellish proprium active and can say, it is not me, the Lord then can remove us from it. This is disidentification, and it is the exit from the cycle. So let's look at what disidentification actually involves. So this slide is the turning point of the entire presentation. Everything before has been building towards this breakthrough insight. The sense of self need not be identified with the hellish proprium. The exit route. Our work is not to suppress or fix the evil, but to expose it to the light, acknowledge it as arising from the hells, then look to the word as the Lord to remove it. 3 movements: expose, acknowledge as not being the self, and allow the Lord to remove it. Exposure. We cannot work with what we cannot see. The first movement is to look honestly at the hellish proprium when it is active, not to look away, not to rationalize, not to explain it away, to see it clearly. And this requires courage. Then we have to acknowledge that it is not ourself. This is the breakthrough insight. The hellish proprium that we are observing is not the essential self. It is hellish influx that has attached to our sense of self. The hells work through attaching their character to our feeling of meanness. Disidentification breaks this attachment. This anger, this contempt, this self-seeking, I can see it. It is active, but it is not me. It arises from the hells, not from the Lord's life in me. Then it's about allowing the Lord to remove it. Once we stop claiming ownership of the hellish proprium, stop defending it, stop justifying it, stop being condemned by it, we create the space for the Lord as the Word to act. He gathers these states, decouples our sense of self from them, and casts them out to the periphery. This is not our work, it is His. Our work is only to see and to not claim it as our own. Now, because the awakening process devastates the false self-image, it helps to remind ourselves that the Lord governs every detail of the process. All is directed by the laws of divine providence, which include the laws of permission. Nothing arises in this process that is not governed by necessity so far as our spiritual well-being is concerned. What needs to be exposed will be. The process itself builds trust that the Word can carry us through whatever arises. So when disidentification takes root, something new begins to emerge, what the heavenly doctrine calls the heavenly proprium. Metanoia, the Greek word for repentance. It literally means a new mind, a new way of thinking. When we cease trying to reform the hellish proprium and instead choose to think from the goods and truths of the Word, this new mind begins to emerge. This is the heavenly proprium, a genuine sense of self that is grounded in what is of the Lord. When we turn to the Word seeking truths with the intent to live from them, a change begins in the mind. Subtle shifts occur in the state of our affections and belief structures. To work with the Word is to begin thinking from the Lord as the Word, from the goods and truths that are the Word. This is the practice of repentance, the Greek metanoia, a new mind, a new way of thinking, the product of a transformative change of heart. The three dimensions shown on this slide are worth dwelling on. Integration. The Word is not just read, it is integrated into life. It forms a genuine spiritual conscience, not as a set of rules to be followed externally, but an inner compass that has become one with the will. The New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine, number 131, it says, "A member of the church has his conscience formed by the truths of faith he learns from the Word. But it is the truths that are applied, worked into actual life through practice and self-examination. These are those truths that form a genuine conscience. Information or knowledge that is solely of the memory is not able to produce a genuine conscience. Lived truth is what forms a genuine conscience because it is implanted in a new heart." True worship. The emergence of the heavenly proprium changes the nature of worship. It is no longer primarily an external act, attending a service, saying the right things, performing the appropriate devotions. It becomes, as Heaven and Hell 506 says, worshipping the Lord from their very life. The worship is internal. It is the constant orientation of the will toward what is of the Lord, expressed as an inner sensitivity to what's presenting within and assessing that in the light of the Word. Our worship is our practice. Then there's freedom. Heaven and Hell 506 describes those in whom the heavenly proprium is developing as feeling like one aroused from sleep into full wakefulness, as if passing from darkness into light. This is the freedom that Phase 2 is working toward, not the freedom of the hellish proprium, which is really slavery to its passions, but the freedom of a genuine sense of self grounded in the Word, acting from an interior affection for truth. One loves what is good and true, not from external pressure, but simply because it is good and true. As the heavenly proprium emerges, a definitive sorting occurs. Phase 2 culminates in separation and a reorganization. Through the practice of the Word, the sense of self is decoupled from those hellish states that make up the infernal proprium. What is evil and false no longer forms the centre, but is pushed to the periphery. The sense of self is now grounded in the goods and truths of the Word, giving rise to a heavenly sense of self. The process of this transformation opens when an effort is made as of self to acknowledge evil states. The as of self is essential. It affirms the appearance of self-generated action while acknowledging that the real agent is the Lord. Without this, a heavenly proprium isn't possible. We act as if we are choosing to acknowledge the evil, as if we were the ones doing the work of shunning it as sin against the Lord. Yet it is acknowledged on every point that in ourselves nothing is possible. All is done by the Lord, who enables us to see, enables us to acknowledge, and enables us to shun evils. This transformation, the gathering and removal, is the Lord's work through the Word as we look to apply its truths to the life of our mind. In this we have another Logopraxis aphorism which states that your effort accomplishes nothing, but without effort nothing is accomplished. The diagram shows the result clearly. Heavenly goods and truths are drawn towards the centre. Hellish evils and falsities are cast to the periphery. The periphery of the mind is what the heavenly doctrine calls hell. Not a geographical location, but the outermost margin of the mental world, where things that are opposed to heaven reside. They are not destroyed, they remain as a kind of counterweight that maintains freedom. But they are no longer at the centre, no longer the ruling principle of our life. Practically, this is felt as a stabilization. The churning of Phase 2, the alternating states, the crisis of nakedness, the merit-guilt cycle begins to settle. Not because the work is complete, but because the centre holds. There is a growing sense of what is of the Lord in us and what is not. And the what is of the Lord becomes increasingly the organizing principle of life. And with that separation accomplished, Phase 3 opens. Phase 2 ends with a bifurcation. States that are wholly of a hellish quality, states that have no receptivity to what is good and true, are cast out to form the hells. The quality of the loves of self in the world is now seen through. There is no ambiguity here, only a full acceptance that they are nothing but evil and falsity. This is not a tragedy, it is completion. The hellish proprium finds its rightful place in a mind ordered by the Lord. The way this separation occurs highlights the importance of the practice of the word in spiritual life. The separation of states is a product of applying the word to the life of the mind to discern the quality of what is presenting. And because the word is the Lord, this is what is meant when it says that the Lord does this. It is not done without our participation in the process. The Lord as the Word gives you the ability to see what needs to be seen and to act in response to what is seen. The hellish proprium finds its natural home and is cast into hell because you no longer identify with it as yourself, but see it for what it is. States that are of the Lord, states in which the heavenly proprium has begun to take shape, move forward into the third state. Not all at once, not completely separated from residual hellish influences, but with the center cleared, with the ruling love now genuinely orientated toward the Lord, the way opens. The third state is a state of pure instruction, having shed the contradictions of the mask and the attachments of the hellish proprium. The mind is now fully prepared for assimilation into a heaven community of use. Two things are noted. The mind has shed both the mask, that is the exterior persona of phase 1 work, and the attachments of the hellish proprium, the deep interior bindings of phase 2 work. What remains is something genuinely open, not empty. The heavenly proprium is present, open and receptive, ready to receive truths that support the unique form of use for which this specific mind was created. Phase 2 is the most demanding phase in the process of awakening. The exposure of the interior, the encounter with the hellish proprium, the crisis of nakedness, the merit-guilt cycle, the struggle of temptation. None of this is easy, but all of it is sacred work. The Lord is present in every moment of it, managing the process with infinite precision and care. And the golden sphere on the platform radiating light toward the path ahead is the promise. Something has been refined, something genuine has emerged, and the way forward is illuminated.